Privilege of being associated with President Kennedy in his days in the White House, and associated again with Senator Robert Kennedy in his quest for the impossible dream, joined together because we felt so strongly that someone must pick up the standard, that someone must face up to the grave crisis that faces the United States of America, both here at home and abroad. I served in all the deliberations of the Platform Committee and on the staff that drafted this report, and I too joined the chairman and the members for the very constructive approach to the problems and the crises here in the United States. But I would like to present to this convention a platform that the chairman suggested, which really is the most forward-looking document that perhaps this Democratic Party or the United States has ever seen. It speaks to the great problems of the United States, the problems of the city, the problems of civil rights, the problem that the Kern Report addressed itself to, the problems of the lack of education of many of our citizens, the problem of our older citizens, of labor, of old age, of all of the things that affect the United States of America. And it speaks to them in terms of a crisis that must be met. We in the Platform Committee wrote a document that looks to the future and not to the past, until a plank was introduced that, in my judgment, does not face the crises of the future. The platform we wrote calls upon you, as delegates, Congress, to face up to the problems of America. It calls upon us to spend billions and billions of dollars to carry out the recommendations and the suggestions that we incorporated in our platform and that you will adopt at some stage today. Billions of dollars of new money to meet the crisis in the cities, to help our mayors, to help the states meet their own problems at home. And ladies and gentlemen, it is the height of irresponsibility for us to adopt a platform to recommend to the Congress programs that in fact we are not capable of funding in the Congress of the United States. In the last Congress of the United States, due to the inability of us to meet our obligations abroad, our balance of payments, and even the unworthy programs that are now before us that are just beginning to meet the grave problems of over 100 years of neglect, we were forced to watch a Congress of the United States, in order to appear to be responsible or even be responsible, cut the budget $6 billion in the last Congress, and they cut it out of all of the programs that are affecting the lives of every single American, out of our programs in health, in education, and the problems that face our children. Ladies and gentlemen, we are recommending at this moment a budget to the Congress of the United States which will cause a great increase in expenditures to meet these problems. And we will not have the money unless we are able in some fashion to disengage ourselves from the expenditures not only of our best treasure, our young men, but the fact we are spending $30 billion a year in a foreign venture in South Vietnam. It must end. We have said unconditional bombing, halt, because this is a prerequisite that Hanoi has suggested, or they will not talk. Let the majority report not delude us. It does not change one iota from what we have suggested in the past. We suggest we look to the future. Let us recognize there is a civil war in Vietnam between the Saigon government and many other indigenous forces, the Viet Cong, but many others. Let us recognize that fact. The Minority Report says they must negotiate with each other about their own country and let Hanoi go home and let the United States bring her 600,000 troops home. That's what we seek. And lastly, let me just complete. Let us not delude the American people that we can adopt this platform in its domestic sense, meet our responsibilities for vast expenditures of money to meet the problems of the United States of America, and continue a foreign adventure, a foreign engagement that is costing us $30 billion a year. This is the height of irresponsibility, and let us not leave this convention as the Republicans left Miami, promising all things to all people. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, before introducing the next speaker, let me make an announcement of great importance. It appears now that on the basis of as best we can calculate, the vote on this most important measure will occur at about 2:45 or thereabouts. We're informed that a number of delegations from a number of states are having caucuses here and elsewhere, and the chair is suggesting to those delegates that they be advised that they be in the chamber no later than the time that I've just now announced. And now it's my privilege to introduce a distinguished lady from the great state of Minnesota, Mrs. Jerry Joseph.
Mr. Chairman, fellow delegates, fellow Americans, the majority report calls for the election of a government in South Vietnam, an election in which all parties and factions may participate. The minority report demands that the Saigon government now, before an election and before a ceasefire, negotiate with the Communist National Liberation Front to create a government which is made up of all elements in South Vietnam. My friends, what is our only purpose in Vietnam? It is to provide conditions under which the people of South Vietnam may know peace and begin the long process of recovery and development. I believe that the election of a truly representative government is the only way to lasting peace. And I believe that an imposed coalition government is no more than a stepping stone to a disruptive, long-term communist takeover. The minority plank does not mention free elections. We all want an end to that war in Southeast Asia. Not just some of us, but all of us. We deplore the political tactics sometimes used by the Saigon government. We are all frustrated by the very hard role of being an ally and not the supreme commander. But if we want a lasting answer in Vietnam, if we want a government which truly has the support of the people, then the people themselves must choose their leaders. Freedom of choice, self-determination, the right of people to choose. These are the themes of America's message to the world. So it has been, and so it is now. If we abandon a nation for which we have fought so hard and so long, if we abandon it at the moment when realizations are in sight, then what hope can there be for people in Eastern Europe? What hope for people throughout the world for whom self-determination is still no more than an elusive dream?
Mr. Chairman, I am honored to bring to the platform a decorated combat veteran, the former congressman from Cincinnati, the Democratic nominee and the next United States Senator from Ohio, a man who played a very key part in the development of this comprehensive and thoughtful minority report, the Honorable Jack Gilligan.
Mr. Chairman, fellow delegates, fellow Democrats, we are gathered here in this great convention in free assembly as free men to consider certain proposals which we as a party must take to the people this fall. We must now consider not only what this long and tragic conflict in Vietnam has done to that tortured nation, but what it has done to America, to our plans, to our ideals, to our image of ourselves as a people. We have not only devastated Vietnam, but we have distorted the vision of America. We went to Vietnam to help, but now we remain to destroy. We did not intend it so, but as Tacitus once said, we have created a desert and called it peace. We wanted the people of the UN of Vietnam to live in freedom. Now our concern is that they be able to live at all. We went there to preserve freedom. Now there is no freedom in Vietnam, north or south. We wanted to save the children of Vietnam from tyranny. Now we want to save them from death. And what of ourselves? And what of our people? And what of our sons? We have lost 25,000 young American lives in Vietnam, lives and talents which this nation desperately needs for the solution of our problems at home. We have spent $100 billion, money and resources which again are needed for the repair of the ravages in our own societies. Scripture says, what father, if asked by his son for bread, would give him a stone? Our young men have asked for a chance to build and develop, and we have sent them overseas to destroy and to kill. Our young black people have asked to be trained for a job, and we have trained them for warfare. We are told we cannot afford to rebuild our cities because the necessary funds are diverted to the destruction of the villages of Vietnam. I say to you that we here in this convention today are facing the ultimate decision which the people of this country are going to have to make in the weeks and the months ahead. If the leadership to make this terrible and fateful decision is to come at all, it must come from the Democratic Party. It is obviously not going to come from our adversaries. That decision will not be made by a few leaders or a few appointed officials. It will be made, if it is made at all, by we, the people of the Democratic Party and of the United States, met here in Chicago today.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege and pleasure to present to you a representative from that great new state in our magnificent United States, Representative Spark Matsunaga of Hawaii.
Mr. Chairman, fellow Americans, despite our seeming disagreement, there is one thing about which I am sure we can all agree, and that is that we are all Democrats by our own free choice. I think we can also agree that we are Democrats because we know we can always do better than any other political party by any other name. But we must admit that in the process of doing better, we also fight each other better than any other political party. It has been said that in a way we Democrats are like alley cats. We fight like the Dickens, but end up with darling little kittens. We are now debating what is undoubtedly the toughest issue of this convention. Our political enemies, as well as a few within our own ranks, are saying that this is the issue which will split the Democratic Party and lead to its defeat in November. Knowing this, we must resolve our differences on this issue with a plank that is at least acceptable to most of us. Unanimity, of course, is not possible. Basically, as Democrats, we can all agree that ours is a peace party. We must not deceive ourselves into thinking that we are being asked now to choose between a peace plank and a war plank. Both the majority and minority planks offer a peace plank. Neither should we be misled or confused by the convenient labels of hawks and doves. We are all Democrats concerned with attaining the earliest possible peace in Vietnam. In a real sense, the difference lies in the tactics to be applied in attaining peace in Vietnam. The goal is the same. I rise in support of the majority plank because it offers the realistic approach and, under all the circumstances, the right way. It is a plank which most Americans can and will support. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm honored to introduce one of the early voices in the House in opposition to this war, one of the true leaders of Black America, the young, able, effective, and distinguished congressman from the state of Michigan, the Honorable John Conyers. Sock it to him, baby.
Mr. Chairman and my fellow delegates, I come to this podium with one question. If the majority report is really what it means to say to you here today, why has it not been effectuated in the last 4 years? Why should we wait till this particular point to begin to determine what should have been recognized since I arrived in the Congress some almost 4 years ago? And because of my conviction that we have misplaced sorely our emphasis in Vietnam, I must tell you that I have voted against supplemental appropriations every time they've come up every year and will continue to do so as long as my district sends me to the Congress. And I would like to remind you that it was in this spirit that the late, beloved Dr. Martin Luther King began to acquaint me with the deeper, more philosophical meanings of nonviolence, because he asked me how I could be nonviolent as a person and not help lead the greatest nation in the world to the nonviolent philosophy. I couldn't answer him, and that's why I stand here urging black and white Americans to join us in making this great issue have an honest and deep conviction to all of us everywhere. I can't continue to tell those in the ghettos and slums across America that we can't produce the domestic programs, an America of opportunity for all, when every time I present a program, my own party leaders tell me the war in Vietnam prevents it. We here can change that, and I urge that you act dispositively today. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, the former governor of Nevada, the former head of the Governor's Conference, the past state chairman and national committeeman-elect, a Humphrey Pledge delegate, the Honorable Grant Sawyer of Nevada.
Mr. Chairman, fellow delegates, Mr. Burton stated that I was a Humphrey delegate, and I think in order to put my remarks in proper context, I should tell you that I am a Johnson-Humphrey man, a strong supporter of Hubert Humphrey, I hope and believe he will be nominated here today. I want very much to see him elected in November. Now, in addition to his other credentials, I'm personally convinced that if elected president, Hubert Humphrey will be more able to quickly and honorably terminate our involvement in Vietnam than any other candidate. I have become increasingly concerned, frustrated, and doubtful about our role in Vietnam. I am convinced that the deep unrest in our country is principally rooted in this conflict. I suppose that I could be labeled a Humphrey Dove.
30 seconds.
Some other Humphrey supporters on the platform committee with me found themselves in the same position. We came to the conclusion that the Democratic nominee, whoever he may be, must have room to move quickly and effectively and honorably to end our involvement in this tragic conflict. Now, without arguing the merits of the past policy, a platform which tends to bind us and our candidates to a continuation of it not only unnecessarily ties the hand of our candidate, but in my view, will in all probability result in the defeat of Democrats everywhere in November. We must offer real and substantial hope of ending this conflict if we expect to win. Even though we have some quarrels with the minority plank, a substantial number of Humphrey people take the view that the adoption of it will indicate a desire to rethink and explore new alternatives and will strengthen our candidates immeasurably. In supporting the minority report, we act in what we consider to be the best interest of all Democratic candidates everywhere. Thank you.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to present my colleague in the House of Representatives, who has served with distinction on the Committee on Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Clement Zablocki of the great state of Wisconsin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have been advised that a rumor has been initiated that Vice President Humphrey does not support the majority plank on Vietnam. I am authorized by Vice President Humphrey to inform the delegates that he fully supports the Vietnam Plan. And I am pleased and proud to join the Vice President in supporting the majority plank on Vietnam because I think it is the right road to peace. The plank is reasonable, moderate, and a balanced statement. My fellow delegates, I support the majority plank not only with the conviction that it is right, but in the conviction that we are speaking the sentiments of the vast majority of the American people. That majority of Americans cannot be labeled as hawks, and they cannot be labeled as doves. They are passionately interested in peace. And the majority resolution before you is neither a plank, nor a dove, nor a hawk resolution. It is a statement of a party committed to peace. We have been polled almost to death these last few months, and I do not wish to base my case on polls alone. But you will recall that several recent polls have made it unmistakably clear that vast majorities of Americans have supported these basic propositions. The people of America seek to end the war in Vietnam as soon as possible. The majority plank declares that, and I quote, our most urgent task in Southeast Asia is to end the war in Vietnam. The American people oppose a halt in the bombing that is totally unilateral. The majority plank calls for the end to the bombing, but provides what Americans have indicated by almost 3-1 they would insist upon. The plank calls for the protection of for our troops in the field and asks us to take into account response from the other side. The people of America oppose by better than 2-1 the imposition of a coalition government on South Vietnam. The majority resolution declares that, and I quote, the post-war government of South Vietnam should be determined by fair and safeguarded elections, open to all major political factions and parties prepared to accept peaceful political processes. I therefore submit that the people of America support the majority plank. I urge the adoption of the majority plank.
Mr. Chairman, one of the most distinguished members of the United States Senate, a famous son of a famous father, a leader of our party, even at this early age in his life, the distinguished senator from the state of Maryland, Joe Tidings.
My fellow Americans, I rise to support the minority position on the Vietnam plank. The minority report differs from the majority in spirit as well as content. The minority report reflects the recognition by this convention that conditions at home and abroad are changing continually and rapidly. It recognizes that the conditions which may have led to the decisions involving us in the internal affairs of that small, unfortunate nation in 1956, in 1961, in 1965, are not necessarily the same today as they were then. It recognizes that the next President of the United States must not be bound by past policies and past mistakes, regardless of the administration which made them. It recognizes, the minority plank recognizes that the next President of the United States must be able to make all decisions relating to Vietnam free of the past. A distinguished spokesman for the majority stated that the practical differences between the two planks are negligible. My fellow delegates, the spirit and the appearances of the majority report is to rubber stamp the present war policy of the United States in relationship to Vietnam. And I submit that we must not compromise with the policies of the past, which have led to that dearly bought deadlock which now exists in South Vietnam. My fellow delegates, for the sake of our nation and all mankind, we must not temporize with one of the most tragic consequences and conspicuous foreign policy disasters in the history of this nation. With this platform, we should renew the spirit of this party, the belief that peace and freedom and human progress will prevail not so much at the end of a gun, but through the seeds of hope and the tools of industry and education. No nation in the long history of this world approaches our own in its zeal for liberty, its willingness to share its blessings, and to sacrifice in a just cause. Despite our mistakes, our demerits, we are still, as Jefferson said, the last best hope of the world. And my fellow Democrats, we must remain true to that promise in this platform. I thank you.
A gifted and compassionate governor from the great state of Vermont, a man who played a key role through the entire processing of the platform, a man who is going to continue to rise in the political horizons of our party in this land, the Honorable Philip Hoff, Governor of Vermont.
Mr. Chairman, and my fellow Americans, I believe, and I am firmly convinced, that this country stands at the threshold of a new era, a threshold dedicated and with the ability to conquer the traditional enemies of mankind. We now know that we have in our arsenal the weapons to destroy poverty, ignorance, disease, and hunger. The only thing that separates us from this is the will of the American people. And I must say most tragically that the senseless, stupid war of miscalculation has perverted that will. And so today, I invite you, as Americans, dedicated to the best propositions of this country, to join those of us in the minority plank who are willing to forward this battle and to destroy the only thing that stands between us and that purpose, and that is the war in Vietnam, which has destroyed the will not only of the American people, but the will of each of us individually, and has turned us back upon ourselves. I plead with each and every one of you, let us not return to that post-Korea period of our lives, but rather may we together forward ourselves. Thank you.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have the great privilege of presenting one of the distinguished lady members of the United States House of Representatives and a longtime member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Edna Kelly of the great state of New York. Ms. Kelly.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, fellow Democrats, fellow Americans, what is it we want out of our Vietnam plank? We want a definition of principles and goals, not a tactical manifesto. We want to instruct the next President of the United States to make a just and honorable peace, not to limit his options and prejudice his position at the negotiation table. We want a declaration to the world of America's peaceful intent and the Democratic Party's peaceful purpose, not recrimination about the past. The majority plank calls for an honorable and lasting peace in Vietnam, our most urgent task in Southeast Asia. It recognizes our willingness to take some risks in the quest for peace. It supports the talks in Paris. It calls for a halt in bombing when the president, whoever he may be at the time, deems it wise. It calls for a shifting a large share of the interim burden to South Vietnamese army. It calls for the establishment of a freely elected government which can command the support of the people of South Vietnam. It calls upon the next president and the future Democratic Congress to be selective in providing future military and economic assistance to South Vietnam. My fellow Americans, we are here today to nominate the man who will be the next president of the world's most powerful nation. We are not here to instruct an ambassador or a general or an errand boy. We have defined our principles as a party. We expect our candidate to run on those principles. We expect him ultimately to conduct the office of president without prejudice to the safety of America, and without prejudice to the safety of Americans, and without prejudice to his long-range effectiveness in filling our peaceful purpose. Do we want Hubert Humphrey, or Eugene McCarthy, or George McGovern, or any other candidate we may choose to go to the peace table with half his cards face up? Do we think that any man we select will do less than his utmost for peace, or in any way deny the peaceful mandate we have given him? No, my fellow Americans. The majority report is sound, it is realistic, it is rational, and it is sufficient. Therefore, let us accept the plank, my fellow delegates, and send our nominee forth as president and not a puppet. I pray you support the majority report.
Mr. Chairman, a great American spokesman from the heartland of our nation, an early voice in opposition to the course and conduct of the war, the distinguished senior senator from the state of Indiana, Vance Hartke.
The heart and the soul of this campaign should be for peace. Let us finally resolve to strike a blow for peace, and in so doing, reaffirm our reverence for life. The struggle in Vietnam has gone on far too long. Too many have died. Too many have been maimed. And finally, each and every one of us must answer this question: for what? For what? And how much longer do we have to endure the burden of this immoral war? And how much longer do we have to endure a no-win, a no-peace war, and the fantasy of non-negotiation? And how can we explain to our children this American tragedy? And how can we justify the endless, senseless killing? Today we have the opportunity to stand before the world and to admit that we have made mistakes. Not alone that we have made mistakes, we also have the greater courage today to adopt a new policy. So I say to you, we must start a new policy and a new day for Southeast Asia and for the United States by making a solemn commitment to peace in Vietnam. A solemn commitment to peace in Vietnam that will finally allow that tortured people to find their own way to life and liberty, and to end the frustrations and the anxiety of our own people. The minority plank can be that first step. It will at least affirm this great party's will to bring about a settlement of the war in Vietnam.
Time has expired.
It will allow us to affirm life, not death, peace, not war, hope, not despair. So, fellow Democrats, I urge you to make the minority plank the majority plank of this convention, so that it will be written, we here today had the courage to do the brave and the honorable thing before God and the world.
Mr. Chairman, the press secretary and confidant of President John F. Kennedy, the former senator from the great state of California, the Honorable Pierre Salinger.
Mr. Chairman, fellow delegates, I rise in support of the minority plank. This is the moment of truth for the Democratic Party. And this is the moment of truth for our country. The struggle on the floor of this convention will determine whether we have the courage to say that we were wrong, and even greater courage to chart a course towards peace in Vietnam. That course will not be easy. There is danger in what we propose, but our current policy is a bankrupt failure. This minority plank is not the work of any candidate. It is not offered to help the nomination of any candidate, nor to hurt the nomination of any candidate. It is offered because it offers the Democratic Party a real chance for victory in November. I believe that to give the people of the United States a plank on Vietnam, which is indistinguishable from what was offered to us by the Republicans in Miami, is sheer suicide for our party. For me, this debate is the end of a long road which started in March, when the people of New Hampshire responded to the campaign of Senator McCarthy. And when Robert Kennedy added his powerful voice to the struggle by announcing his candidacy for president. It was the issue of Vietnam and his deeply held feelings that the killing had to stop that motivated Robert Kennedy to become a candidate for president. A bullet stilled that voice, but he is here today, and if he were alive today, he would be on that platform speaking for this minority plank. Thank you.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have the great honor. Come on, son. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the next speaker, the Honorable Frank Moss, the senator from Utah. Senator Moss will please take the podium. May we have order, please? There'll be plenty of time for demonstrations and expressions of opinion. We're proceeding here in an orderly fashion. Let's continue to do so, if we may. The distinguished senator is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, my fellow delegates, Democrats and Americans, I rise today to speak for peace. We all want peace. We all want to end the war. We all abhor killing. But I say to you that as a great political party and as a great nation leader of the world, we must pursue this goal
with responsibility, with intellect, with intelligence, just as we are pursuing now the negotiations in Paris in the hopes of finding a political solution, a negotiated solution. And I say to you that the majority plank spells out the way that the next President of the United States can responsibly end the war. If we permit our simple emotions to carry us away from our intellectual consideration of the position we are going to take, then we cannot end the war in a way that will achieve peace in Southeast Asia nor peace anywhere else on the globe. If you will listen for just a moment, the majority report says negotiate with Hanoi an immediate end or limitation to the hostilities and withdrawal from South Vietnam of all foreign forces, but at the same time, the majority report does not attempt to tie the hands of the American and Allied leaders and men who must make the strategic and tactical decisions on the scene and at the top levels of authority. The minority report would have us tell the enemy that we commit ourselves to reduce arbitrarily the bombing with no evidence of their having to agree to reduce their hostilities. To do this is irresponsible and constitutes greatly increased peril for our troops. Again I say to you, our goal is peace. Peace that will endure. Peace that protects a non-aggressor who wishes to live with self-government. Peace which is precious to every mortal on this planet and must be sought with diligence and be available to small and great, mighty and weak, brown and yellow, black and white. The majority plank realistically seeks this goal.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to personally note that the previous speaker is one of the outstanding and most effective and progressive members of the United States Senate. I'm proud to call him my friend. He's an able member of this party, and all of us who serve with him in the House and Senate know that to be the fact. At this time, I would like to introduce the most able and effective senator from the state of Rhode Island, a man who played a very effective role in the drafting and platform committee, the Honorable Claiborne Pell.
Mr. Chairman, fellow Democrats, we have three questions we should ask ourselves. First, looking at the broad sweep of history, should we, to save a nation's government, seek to destroy its institutions and its people? The answer is obviously no. Secondly, should we be guided here by raw emotion, or by face, or by false pride, or should we be guided by thought and by reason? And as we make this decision, let us not forget that young men, young Americans, white and black, are being killed, and 10 times as many young men, yellow, and old men and children are being killed. And third, will we lose more American lives by ceasing the bombing of the North? My answer is no. If we would drop... No, we just have 2 minutes, so please don't applaud. To drop our people down 15 or 20 miles lower, you would find the same tactical effect could be achieved and not a single American life in addition lost. There is another thought I would like to share with you, and that is my own experience as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee. I went on it 4 years ago, new and inexperienced, and we had open minds. At the end of the 4 years, or 3 years, the vast majority of our men debating and studying the problem have come out against it. Thank you. Neither plank is perfect, I recognize that, but the minority plank is the best, and as one who supported Kennedy, one of 3 senators, and one who intends tonight to vote for Hubert Humphrey, I think this is a plank on which he can proudly run, and I urge the support of the minority plank.
The next speaker is one of the noblest men that's ever walked the face of the earth. One of the very first voices in the House of Representatives to speak out against the war and the escalation, the Honorable John G. Dow of New York. A distinguished member of the House of Representatives.
Mr. Chairman, those who regard the minority plank on Vietnam as one that strains too hard for peace ought to know that there are some of us who think it has not gone far enough in that direction. What a swamp our nation has been led into when the great problems of America, the freedom of our citizens, the health of our economy, the existence of our cities, the lives of Americans, all depend now for their preservation on decisions made by strangers in Vietnam. It is indeed humiliating to be waiting for those people to give us a tidy yes and thereby satisfy an America that has made the gravest of judgment. I support the minority plank, for that is a magnificent step in the direction of peace.
Mr. Chairman, no man in the House of Representatives has better liberal credentials than the fearless spokesman I'm about to introduce, the Honorable William Fitzryan, Congressman from Manhattan in the state of New York.
Mr. Chairman and fellow delegates, I rise to support the minority report. Under our unique political system, which is still the best yet devised by man for his own self-government, the Democratic Party proposes to ask the American people for a renewed mandate. 30 seconds. It does so at a time when our nation faces a crisis in leadership unmatched in this generation or century. The fabric of our society has been torn by urban decay, poverty, and racism. The neglect of our domestic problems is an inevitable result of the war in Vietnam. As a Democrat, I believe that our party must repudiate that policy. If it does, it offers the possibility for change, vision, and confidence upon which we can go forth from this campaign to lead America to new heights and new horizons.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have the great honor to present Senator Georgia Davis, who is the first black Kentuckian to be elected to the state Senate in the history of that great Commonwealth, and she is also the first lady to be elected to the legislature of the state of Kentucky. Mrs. Davis.
Mr. Chairman, fellow delegates, there is one argument in the minority report which needs to be dealt with honestly and bluntly. That has to do with the quote, "but for," end quote, argument. Too often we hear, "but for Vietnam." We would have the resources to rebuild our cities. Yes, we must rebuild our cities. And we have the resources to rebuild our cities even with Vietnam in our current defense budget. It all depends on whether we would rather rebuild our cities than have a third car, or a fourth television set, or a